Okay. God bless you. I thought in our time that for tonight we could look a little bit at the early chapters of Genesis, the so-called creation stories. But before we do anything as controversial and as important as that, let's begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Father, send your Holy Spirit into our midst. Grant, Master, that through the illumination of your Spirit, we may read your word with purity of heart and understand the things that you have written to us and apply them in our lives to the glory of your most holy name, who live and reign, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, to ages of ages. Amen. So God bless you all. We wanted to look at Genesis chapter 1. There are a couple of creation stories there. If you wanted more, this is a shameless plug. If you wanted more word studies and stuff like this, you can find the more detailed version of it in this book called In the Beginning. It's the expanded edition published by Sebastian Press, a fresh look at the early chapters of Genesis. So, like I said, shameless advertisement. But it gets into it in a little more detail, especially in terms of the Hebrew word studies and stuff like that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the early chapters of Genesis because they're very controversial, and the problem with reading Genesis is that there's so much noise and the din of controversy and people angrily shouting at one another from across the room. It's Genesis, rather like the book of Daniel, only worse, is one of these things where people go to the barricades for. It's kind of one of these. You can tell whether the person's one of the sheep or the goats, whether we're the sons of light or the sons of darkness by how they think about Genesis, that sort of stuff, you know. The whole biblical exegesis has been dramatically politicized. So the question is, do you teach creation science in school? If you teach creation in school, oh no, the world will end for you probably by a week Thursday or something like that, and your kids are going to grow up to be bloodthirsty communists, God knows what. There's a lot of angry debate about it, and what tends to get lost in the midst of all of the noise and the shouting is what the text actually says. And so the temptation, of course, is for those that are of a more fundamentalist mindset, is to say the Bible is true, which it is, and true means historically true according to our canons of writing history and our historiography. The way that we write history books is the way that the ancients wrote history books, which of course it's nothing of the kind. And true means scientifically true. Yeah. We've kind of retreated from this a little bit since we got our butts kicked in the whole Galileo thing. We've been through this scientific thing before with Galileo, because the scriptures are quite abundantly clear that in fact the sun moves across the sky, because you can see it move across the sky. You know, that's why we talk about sunrise and sunset. And you know, Joshua said to the sun, "Stand thou still." So the people in the church said, "Therefore the sun must move." Looks like it moves. And Galileo said, "No, the sun doesn't actually move. The earth is the one moving. It's revolving on the sun, and it's revolving on its axis and things like that." But if you are of a certain mindset, you say, "Nope, the Bible trumps science." And it would if there was any conflict. Since there isn't any conflict, there's no actually trumping one way or the other going on. But so if you have a certain mindset that says the Bible teaches science, we more or less say, except for that Galileo thing, but in every other thing, now the Bible teaches science. So that the Genesis account of the creation of the world has to be scientifically correct. Okay, so if that's where you're at, then you tend, with what we know about science, we tend to read in to the Genesis account, even if it's not there. Fancy name for this is concordism, which is to say science and the biblical interpretation have to be in concord and agreement, one with another. So very often, sometimes when people are dramatizing the book of Genesis, when God says, "Let there be light," they say, "Oh, that's the Big Bang," you know, because we realize our bit of science says the universe began with the Big Bang, so "let there be light" must be the Big Bang, despite the fact that the text says absolutely nothing of the kind. The text says it's called day, and the absence of is called night. So the temptation is to read our science into it to make them fit. That means that you can only do that if you stop really reading the text carefully. But I would suggest, because it's the Word of God, you got to read it carefully. If you don't like what it says, tough for you, that's what it says, and you're going to have to somehow cope with it one way or the other. Some fundamentalists are not very good at that, and they're determined to somehow rescue the text scientifically no matter what. So there's a journal called the Creation Science, the Creation Research. Hang on, what is it? Creation Research, Creation Science. I think it's Creation Science Journal. I'm having a senior's moment. Can you edit the tape to make me younger? Maybe not. But it was tough. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to find little bits of science that will back up the biblical account. But again, you can only do it if you really, really don't read the thing. So my intention tonight is to really, really read the thing and to say what it actually says. So Genesis 1, verse 1. Instantly we have two possibilities for translating the Hebrew. You could translate it, as most Bibles do, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, or you could translate it, when God began to create the heavens and the earth. Both are equally good translations. The latter, which I prefer, brings it into line with some of the early pagan accounts of creation, which begin by describing what the earth was like before the creation. So I would suggest that it begins by saying, when God began to create the heavens and the earth was tohu and bohu, usually translated formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. In other words, before God began to create, everything was useless and a mess. But whatever. I mean, if you want to translate it, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, that's okay too. That phrase would therefore constitute a summary of what was to follow. In the beginning, you would say, God created the heavens and the earth, and I'm about to describe it to you. So I suppose it comes down to the same thing. The word create is the word bara in the Hebrew, and it kind of means a fresh creation. You know, something. This is a new beginning. And before God began to create, the earth was tohu and bohu. So like I said, usually translated formless and void. That's not exactly what it means. In other parts of the scripture, when it's talking about after the devastation of war, the earth will be tohu and bohu. And it doesn't mean formless and void. It doesn't somehow undo the creation. It means that it'll be useless for anything. After the enemy armies have tromped through the thing, you can't grow crops on it. It's totally useless. So what the author of Genesis is trying to say is that before God began to create, this was a noise to anybody. What God did was make a world that men could dwell in. Mm-hmm. So again, but this is your first clue, that Genesis is written from man's point of view. God made the creation for us. That's a particular kind of a theological point. So, for example, later on he would say, it made the sun, the moon, and the stars for signs and for seasons, for days and for years. The only people who made signs and seasons is us. Mm-hmm. And so the author of Genesis is saying, this is when we're down here and we're looking at the world that we can see around there that God made for us. Mm-hmm. So before God began to create, it was tohu and bohu, and darkness was over the face of the tahom, the deep, the abyss. Mm-hmm. And it goes on to say, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the mayim, of the waters. So there's a couple of things. First of all, the Spirit of God is the word Ruach Elohim. Elohim is the word for God. It could be, you could also translate Elohim as a superlative, the cedars of God, meaning the big cedars. But almost certainly here it's God's Ruach. The real question is, how do you translate Ruach? It's the normal word to translate spirit and wind and breath. It's the ancients looked at again, they noticed that when people, when moving air, sometimes called wind, stopped coming out, or breath, stopped coming out of people's bodies, they were dead. So if you have spirit in you, if you have life in you, you also have breath in you. You have moving wind. You have ruach. The words also used combine all of these meanings in Ezekiel, when in the vision of the valley of the dry bones. So you'll recall that story is about the national extinction. that in fact, we can find it if you a little bit. If you want to come with me to Ezekiel, towards the end, it is in Ezekiel 37. Tempting as it is to get into a long, go down a rabbit hole, we won't do that. But I would like to illustrate how elastic and how important the word Ruach is, and how it essentially defies translation. It would be best not to translate it, but if you're coming up with a translation, you got to translate it. So, but how to translate it? I think the New American talks about it as a wind from God. Yeah, okay, but it's one does one's best. So, Ezekiel 37. The hand of Yahweh was upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of Yahweh, and set me down in the middle of a valley, and it was full of bones. And he caused me to pass among them round about, and behold, there were very many on the surface of the valley, and behold, they were very dry. He said to me, Son of man, can these bones live? And I answered, Lord Yahweh, you know. And he said to me, Prophesy over these bones, and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Yahweh. Thus says the Lord Yahweh to these bones, Behold, I will cause Ruach to enter into you, that you may come to life. And behold, I will put sinews on you, and make flesh grow back on you, and cover you with skin, and put Ruach in you, that you may come alive, and you will know that I am Yahweh. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied there was a noise, and behold a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to bone. And I looked, and behold sinews were on them, and flesh grew, and skin covered them, but there was no Ruach in them. Then he said to me, Prophesy to the Ruach, prophesy, O son of man, say to the Ruach, Thus says the Lord Yahweh, come from the four Ruachs, is the word, O Ruach, and breathe upon these slain, that they may come to life. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and the Ruach came into them, and they came to life, and stood on their feet, an exceeding great army. And they said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, Our bones are dried up, our hope is perished, we are completely cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, Thus says the Lord Yahweh, Behold, I will open your graves, and cause you to come out of your graves, my people, and I will bring you into the land of Israel. Then you will know that I am Yahweh, when I have opened your graves, and caused you to come up out of your graves, my people. And I will put my Spirit, my Ruach within you, and you will come to life, and I'll place you in your own land. Then you will know that I, Yahweh, have spoken and have done it, declares Yahweh. So it's not talking about the final resurrection, believe it or not. It's talking about the hope of national resurrection. The nation was, as a nation, dead as a doornail. If you went into a valley and saw these dry bones glistening, whitening in the sun, you'd say, well, they're real dead. Mm-hmm. Dead beyond recovery. Not just dead and dying, you know, is there life in them? Is life in them? No, if it's a valley of dry bones, they're dead. But God was saying, I will bring you back to national resurrection. And that's the image. Anyway, so they have this, the bones come up, and there's sinews and flesh and skin on them, but they're essentially corpses until you prophesy to the wind, and the wind comes from the four winds into their bodies, and they come alive. So the word Ruach is the word for wind, because he's prophesying to the four winds. And it's also breath, because that comes into them, and that's their spirit. That's the spirit of man within them. So it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. So you need to know that's kind of Ruach all the way. It's significant that when God creates, the Ruach of God is there. And you can see it, by the way. This is the same Ruach that that brings life after the flood. And for the national creation of Israel, when they're at the Red Sea, a Ruach from Yahweh comes on the waters of the Red Sea and separates them so that they can pass dry shod. If you're reading in the original, you're thinking, oh, the Ruach Elohim that was in creation is at the end of the flood, bringing new life again, and in the creation of Israel, same thing. If you're English and you have to force to translate between breath, spirit, and wind, then you can miss what's going on. Anyway, all of this richness is crammed into the highly untranslatable words Ruach Elohim. So that there was.
I already have a question.
Please do. Yeah.
About the earth was without form or void, or the chaos.
Yep.
You're saying from man. This is from man's perspective.
Yes.
Is there any sort of thought on what had previously been created before God began this fresh creation as you...
Funny you should ask. That's my next thing. Okay, good. So, you see that there was, the earth was useless, tohu and bohu, and darkness was over the surface of the tehom, over the deep. And the Spirit of God, the Ruach Elohim, was moving over the surface of the waters. The real question is, where did the waters come from? What's the deal with waters? God hasn't begun to create anything. God didn't create anything yet, because he hasn't said, let there be light. First thing that he says is, let there be light, and then he creates daylight so that he can work. And then he works and creates other stuff. But where's the water? So for us, water is, we understand creation ex nihilo, creation from nothing. Our dogma, our teaching is that before God began to create, there was nothing. Zilch, nothing existed. Nothing. And then God began to create, and then there was something. Okay, but that's the teaching, and you find that later in the scriptures. But right now is in this part of Israel's history, they were speaking and borrowing the cosmology from the ancients, and the ancients said that before the gods or God began to create, everything was sea. Because sea is useless. You can't live on the sea. You can't build on the sea. You can't do anything on the sea. So, if I can jump into the book a little bit, there's some other creation stories. If all you know is Genesis, okay then. But if you put the Genesis stories in the culture of its time, then everything starts to make sense. Then you get what's actually happening. If you don't put it, if you just know Genesis, you're deprived of that richness, you're deprived of that tool. And if you insist on anachronistically reading modern science into it, then you're doubly hooped. But if you can put it back in the culture of its time, that's what you get. So, for example, the opening words. Where am I here? Talking about there was a statement of how things were before creation took place. The Enuma Elish, which is a Babylonian work, begins when the heaven above was not named, and the sacred text was not concerned to locate the creation before time. Its concern was rather to glorify the Creator. So when you're looking at all of those things, for example, in the Babylonian creation story of Marduk's supremacy, in the Enuma Elish it says, when above the heaven had not been named, and below the earth had not yet been called by a name, when Apsu primeval, their begetter, and Mumu and Tiamat, which is a lot like the word Tehom, the deep, she who gave birth to them all, still mingled their waters together. At that time, the gods were created within them. So in this long-running epic, Apsu was the primordial sweetwater ocean, and Tiamat the saltwater sea, and Mumu was the mist rising from them. So before the world was created, all was sea, all was the waters of the deep. You find the same picture in another such creation story, one that begins, a holy house of the gods in a holy place had not yet been made, a reed had not yet come forth, a tree had not yet been created, a brick had not yet been laid, all the lands were sea. So for that particular cosmology of the ancients, before anything happened, everything was sea. So it's not surprising that the Hebrew story borrows the cosmology. It wants to make some points that aren't in the pagan cosmology, but apart from that, it leaves it intact. For example, one of the points that it wants to make was that there aren't any other gods there. For the pagan stories, there's lots of gods, but for here, there's only the Hebrew God, Elohim. It's making the revolutionary statement that the other gods might not as well have existed, because the one who made the heaven and the earth is the God of the little tiny Hebrew 12 tribes, not the God of the superpowers, Marduk. They're gone. Marduk. Who's Marduk? Who's Marduk? It's Yahweh Elohim is the one that made the world. But so that's the story, and wants to make some other points as well. But that's the point that it wants to make, and it's not concerned to tweak the scientific cosmology of its day. So that's why the waters are there. It would be taken for granted by the ancients that before the world was created, all was sea. Sea is the image of chaos. Sea is, in the mythology of the ancient world, and including in Isaiah, the sea is imaged by Leviathan, the sea serpent, an agent of chaos, that sort of stuff. So that's what it starts off when all is sea before God begins to create. Or as we would say, the sea is an image of the primordial chaos, in which nothing is possible. Everything's tohu and bohu. So when God begins to create, on the first day, God said, "Let there be light," mere two words in the Hebrew, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. So if you add up the number of times, hang on, this will be a while for a sec. If you add up the number of times it said, and God said, how many times does God say? Can you guess? 10. Just like the 10 Commandments, which are not called the 10 Commandments in both the Hebrew and in the Greek. They're not called the 10 Commandments, the 10 mitzvot. They're called the 10 dabarim, the 10 words. And so I would suggest that the fact that there are 10 words for the 10 Commandments, the exordium, the beginning of the Torah, and there are 10 words of creation, it's the same thing. God created through a mere 10 words, and also began to create Israel through a mere 10 words. It's the same thing if you kind of count them all up. And it's interesting that when you compare it to the ancient pagan creation stories, the gods are fighting one with another, and they're breeding, and they're doing all sorts of stuff. Lots of action, lots of sweating. Like I said, lots of killing and breeding. But our God doesn't need to kill. There's no so-called theomachy. There's no warfare against the gods. Yahweh, Elohim, is sovereign. He just says, light exists, 2 words, and light exists. They're sovereign, powerful, untroubled omnipotence. So the world is created in a mere 7 words. The other thing that you got to know is that for the ancients, creation didn't just consist of something coming into physical existence. To be fully created, it had to have a use. And if it doesn't have a use, it's not fully created. So the idea, if you're going to create something that has no use, then it might as well not have been created. And therefore, an essential part of any creation is to give it a name. You don't just create stuff. What's that? I don't know. No, it's got a name. That's why he keeps saying God called the light day, and he called the darkness night. He called the water seas. He called that sort of stuff. That's why Adam names the animals, that sort of stuff. So for us, a name is just a verbal tag, But for them, a name indicates a function. It's useful to man, because this is an anthropocentric creation. It was created for man. So that's what it means to create. To create means that it now has a function. That's the point of saying the name. We can kind of miss it. It's got a name, whatever. No, for us a name is, my name is Steve. It could be more or less anything, But in those days, a name indicated your power. It indicated your honor, your manifested. When it says, for example, in the Psalms, "Save me, O God, by your name, and judge me by your strength." Your strength and your name is the same thing. You had power and vitality in the world because that was your name. So that's the very first thing. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and God saw that the light was good. The word "good" is the Hebrew word "tov," and it doesn't mean ethically good. I mean, like ethically good. It means if something is good, it means it is able to fulfill the function for which it was made. Again, it's all functional. So daylight was good because it could do what daylight's supposed to do. It allows people to work. So then comes the next working shift in verse 6, day 2. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. And God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. So this is where most people, if you're a concordist, if you're determined to read modern science into it, that's where your eyes glaze over and you miss exactly what's happening. Okay, so because we envision the world, that's this globe, and that sort of stuff. We can think there. We can don't think that. Just pay attention to what the text is saying. Forget science. What is the text saying? There was nothing but sea, and it was dark. And God said, let there be light, and now there's day. It's not dark anymore. But everything is still sea.
Yeah.
So what God did, he says, I will make an expanse, a firmament, usually translated, in the midst of the waters, and it separates the waters above from the waters below. And so which is to say, that's the sky. It was taken for granted by the ancients that the sky was solid. Now we say, the sky's not solid. The ancients thought that the sky was solid, and that there was a sea, like the sea down here, the Atlantic, the Pacific, there's seas down here, and there was a sea up there. That's where the rain comes from. So when I talked about open the doors of heaven and the water comes through, we say, oh, that's very poetic. Yeah, but they also thought that it was scientifically accurate.
Yeah.
And so that was they would be caught in the clouds like buckets and poured out. It was understood. So when it talks about the waters that are above the heavens, we think the clouds. No, the sea. The word is, even in the Psalm, I remember being perplexed one time when I was reading Psalm 104. It talks about, you laid the beams of the upper chambers in the waters. And I thought, no, the waters are down here. The upper chambers can't be in the waters or in the sea, as it was called. Because they thought, no, there's no sea up there. The sea's down here. But for the ancients, yeah, and the sea's up there. Probably that's why they thought that's why the sky's blue, because the water's blue.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So and so if your science is based on observation alone, you're going to say that there's a sea up there. That's where the water comes from, and that the sun moves across underneath it because you can see it moving. Now we kind of read our science into it, but only at the cost of not listening to what it's actually saying. So my suggestion is that if you really believe that it's the Word of God, put your scientific concordism in a box for now and listen to what the Bible is actually saying. So what it's actually saying is that everything was sea, and that God made a firmament, and it's the Greek word for it is interest. I'm trying to find the thing. The rakia, thank you. The rakia comes from the Hebrew word meaning to hammer something. Like you hammer something out, and you could put it on a plate, and you could put it on some wood. That's why in Job 37:18 it describes the seas as hard as a molten mirror. That's why, because it was taken for granted that it has to be strong and hard if it's going to hold back the sea. So okay, so if you follow the story, God made the rakia. This translates an expanse because they're trying to retreat from what the thing's actually saying, because then it looks like you're saying that there's something solid up there. Yeah, but and nobody will buy your Bible. Then they're going to be upset, and you'll be the bad Bible. Okay, so then on the third day, God said, "Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, note that it's named, and the gathering of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. So again, now if you're following what's happening, before everything was sea and dark, then it's all sea but light, then there's water up there and water down there, and now the waters are gathered down here, are gathered into one place so that dry land appears. It doesn't say God created the dry land. It says if you read it carefully, he gathered the waters to other place so that dry land could appear. The understanding is that the dry land was already there. That's not our cosmology, but that's what the text actually says. So suck it up, Buttercup. If you say you believe the Bible, that's what you're stuck with. Okay, so it goes on. Then God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit after their kind with seed in them." The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them, and their kind, and God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a third day. Okay, then the fourth day. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the rakia of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, for days and for years. Which, and so if you have a lunar calendar, that's the point. And let them be for lights in the rakia of the heavens, and to give light on the earth. And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night, and the stars also. And God placed them in the rakia of the heavens to give light to the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. You'll note that it does not call them the sun and the moon. It doesn't call them the sun and the moon because in that culture, the names sun and moon were the names of gods. And if you're reading it from a pagan background, gods tended to breed and make other gods. And don't bring in the other gods now. So to make it crystal clear that Yahweh is not creating other gods, doesn't call them the sun and the moon, calls them the big light and the little light, so that no one could understand, no one could think that somehow Yahweh is the grandfather of the gods or something like this. And you'll note that it kind of gives the stars short shrift a little bit. Sun, moon, greater light, lesser light. Sun governs the day, moon governs the night. Oh, and the stars. Why did the stars get kind of short shrift? I suspect there was a hidden polemic against astrology. The ancients thought that, the stars and the heavens and all this stuff kind of governs what's happening down here. And they'd say, no, never mind the stars, never mind astrology, never mind all that stuff. God made the stars, yeah, they exist. Elohim made them. But it kind of mentions them always like a little footnote, and stars, that sort of stuff. I suspect that's the reason. That
emphasize their importance in that context to astrology, right?
I'm sorry?
To remove to make them less important. Like, it's like, yeah, he did the stars too. They're
Yeah.
not as important as you think.
Yeah,
Kind of
I think
astrology-wise.
that's right. I think that the point of downplaying the stars was because the pagans tended to play up the stars, and so we wanted. And this was the ancient. This is more of ancient cosmology, which is to say ancient science, because that's the only time that was available. God apparently it was not God's purpose to say, "Let me tell you about the sun. It doesn't actually move," because who cares? If you think he didn't say, before the creation of the world, everything wasn't all sea, because who cares? But he did care to say Marduk was not involved in any of this. The pagan gods were not involved in any of this. I was the one who did it. The God of Israel, little tiny helpless tribes, not a superpower, Johnny come lately on the international field, their God created the whole heavens and the earth. And Marduk,
Who's that?
yeah, who's that? That's right. So they were told what they actually needed to know.
Right, so
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
so basically the water is like, let's say like nothing, right? In the first, like in verse 2.
Well, the water is the water, which is to say, when it's down here, you call it seas.
No, I mean like the context of it saying like the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the water.
Yeah.
I was like, is it basically nothing? Because I'm picturing it.
Well, no, the water was the water. You know when you go down to the sea, the Pacific Ocean, that's water. That's the sort of thing, according to the story, that the Ruach Elohim was hovering over, because that's all there was.
Okay.
You have to leave science in the drawer for now. We can get back to it because science is nice, but that's not what we're reading. We're reading what the Hebrew people were told by God that they needed to know. So, to sum up, you got water up there, kept off by the solid sky, the rakia. Then you got water down here, but also there's dry land, and the dry land's starting to sprout flowers and stuff with seed in them, so that you can plant. And then God created this underneath the rakia, because the sun, the moon, and the stars. We tend to say the sun, the moon, and the stars are way up there. Well, that's not what Then that's not what the ancients thought. And that's okay. That's what the text says. Like I said, don't read stuff into it. That's not what the text says, because that's not respectful of the text. So, but except for flowers and stuff, you'll note, by the way, that if you're following it carefully and taking notes, the flowers were created before the creation of the sun and moon. If you're going to say this is scientifically accurate, then I'd like you to explain how photosynthesis happened then. You know, according to this story, there was earth, there was flowers on the earth, and everything was, but there's no sun and moon. You say, well, there was light. How did that work? Because the ancients thought that the day was independent of the sun. Because when you get up, you know, you can see, you know, daylight before the sun comes up. So they said, so the daylight, it doesn't come from the sun. You know, the sun comes up and it makes it even brighter, and especially hotter if you're in the Middle East. But so again, if you're going to try to make this scientifically work, you got to say, how is there daylight before the creation of the sun and moon? And so that's when people try to say, well, back then it must have been different. It must have been, or the let there be light is the Big Bang or something like that. But it doesn't say that it's the Big Bang. It says that it's the daylight that you see when you get up out of your bed early in the morning. Yes?
I think I get it. Like, so basically, it's trying to make because like if we use like science now, give it to the ancients, they won't understand. So it's trying to make them understand. So something like that, right?
I'm trying to understand what the text actually says. I don't care about science, right? For
No,
now.
I'm saying like the ancients, like
Yeah, the ancients didn't.
they don't have the resource to know. So
Well, they didn't need to know. They were doing
Yeah.
all they could with the science that they had. They created things which are very nice scientifically, like the wheel and fire, for which we're very grateful. But I mean, but you know, I'm grateful for those things, you know, and they create agriculture, stuff like this, you know, the domestication of animals, which is nice.
no, there's like the point I'm saying, like there's like science right now might be wrong, right? Because like in the future there might be some breakthrough and like some debunks. But like if right now like God needs to tell us something that like even though like it's not correct, but like we don't understand it. So basically, so it's like in that same sense, it's like this. Right?
Well, my point is that I think it's unlikely that science has got the creation of daylight wrong. I suspect that we do. Science has got it right, and there is daylight because the Earth revolves on its axis. I think we're unlikely to find out that that's incorrect. The point is, what type of literature are we reading? Are we reading scientific literature? Clearly not, because science isn't wrong, and the Bible's not wrong. So I would suggest that, in fact, tipping my hand a little bit, as if you couldn't tell already, that the Bible is not written as a scientific, this is not written as a scientific document, it's written as a theological document.
Yes.
And so it's a little bit, just a little bit, like reading Lewis's science trilogy, Out of the Silent Planet and Perelandra, and I suppose That Hideous Strength, which has nothing to do with other planets, but there you go. He had met Charles Williams, so I think it messed up his mind. But at any rate, there was if you're reading Out of the Silent Planet and Perelandra, which is talking about life on Mars and Venus, when you realize that you're not reading a scientific document, you don't get disgusted at Lewis and say, what a stupid guy. Doesn't he know that there's no life on Mars and Venus? Nobody does that because you realize that you're not reading science. So I would suggest that you need to know what you're reading. You're not reading science, you're reading theology. So it's a mistake to import the findings of science into a theological document, just as it is a mistake to import scientific insights into the writing of science fiction. You know, so.
And I guess even in verse 9, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place and let the dry land appear. Theologically speaking, it's God creating order out of chaos.
That's right. Because before everything was tohu and bohu, and slowly, bit by piece, it's fit for us to dwell in. Soon we'll be able to have civilization. In order to do that, you got to get waters up there, and you got to get the waters down here gathered together, and you got to have flowers and plants and crops and stuff, and eventually you're going to have animals in a second, you know, and you need the sun and the moon, and so God's creating that's the point of saying it is anthropocentric. God's creating the world for us. You know, if you're strictly scientific, you could say, well, God just creates the world. You know, what's the point of all of those vast expanse of interstellar space out there, a gazillion light years away? What does it have to do with us? The answer is precisely nothing. But they didn't know about stuff light years away. All they knew is about us is the sun and the moon and the stars, and they were good for us. So it's making the point that God takes care of us. The world was created as our home. That's the point that it wants to make. If you're going to, it's unfair to say, what's good's that other stuff for us? They don't know about that other stuff. They're talking about God's care and love for human beings and the people and the people that He made. So, verse 20. Then God said, "Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures." Nepeshes, actually, souls, if you want to put it like that. And let the birds fly in the earth in the open expanse of the heaven. And God created the great sea monsters, the Tanaim, and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. God saw that it was good. And God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and the morning, a fifth day. So we got to talk a little bit about what it means to bless something. Barak is the Hebrew. We tend to use the word to say, "Oh, I feel so blessed." That means I feel very euphoric because I experience God's presence. Yeah, fair enough. But the word originally meant something very physical. It had to do with fertility. So that if God blessed your sheep, it had lots of little sheeps, little lambs. If God blessed your cows, it had lots of little calves. If God blessed you, you had lots of children. That sort of stuff. So that's what you get in the Psalms. A blessing has to do with fertility, vitality, vigor, fecundity. You can find this, for example, once again in the Psalms. I have to find out here for a second. Where am I here? How blessed, this is Psalm 128. "Blessed is everyone who fears Yahweh, who walks in His ways. When you shall eat the fruit of your hands, you'll be happy. It will be well with you. Literally, it will be good with you. Tov. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. Your children like olive plants on your table. Behold, thus shall the man be blessed who fears Yahweh. The Lord bless you from Zion. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life. Indeed, may you see your children's children." So the blessing had to do with that sort of fertility and fecundity as well. So, for example, in Psalm 144, you get the same understanding of what it means, what blessing, barakah, means. It says, "Let your sons in their youth be as grown-up plants, and our daughters corner pillars fashioned for a palace. Let our gardens be full, furnishing every kind of produce, and our flocks bring forth thousands and 10,000s in our fields. Let our cattle bear without mishap and without loss, that there be no outcry in our streets. How blessed are the people who are so situated. How blessed are the people who fear the Lord." The word blessed here is the word asher, but it's the same thing. If God blesses you, you are asher. You are blessed. You are happy. You are fortunate. You are to be envied, stuff like this. And so that's kind of, and we need to know this because God's going to bless human beings in a minute. So when it says be fruitful and multiply, that's the blessing. You want to have not just a few fish, you want to have them teeming with fish. You want to have the sky full of birds and things like that. And so God's slowly creating a world for us. And the last thing He creates is human beings. The point that He wants to make in this first creation story is that mankind, Adam in the Hebrew, is the crown of creation. First you make the kingdom, and then you make the king and the queen. So then we come to verse 24. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures, nephesh, after their kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the fields of the earth after their kind." And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the earth after its kind. And God saw that it was good. A living creature, the word is, as I mentioned before, is the word nephesh. Sometimes translated soul. Man was created a living nephesh. A nephesh, a soul, means something that's animated, something that moves. The word anima, from which you get the word animate, is the Latin for soul. And so the idea is that they've noticed if something's moving around, if it's animated, that's a nephesh. If it doesn't move, it's dead, it's not a nephesh. So a soul, a nephesh, is something that actually moves. So it's a little bit, when you translate it soul, it can confuse you a little bit, because every so often somebody will say, do animals have souls? And what they're trying to get at is there a difference between animals and human beings, you know? Usually when they're asking if animals have souls, it's a very poignant question. They mean little Johnny's dog has just died and little Johnny's upset, and will Johnny see his little dog again? I would say yes, if God thinks that Johnny needs to. But nonetheless, the pattern, the paradigm that they're working for is to say you have a human being, and in it God has a soul for you, and that when you die, the soul survives, and so that the body dies, but the soul survives and goes to heaven. Animals don't have souls, so when they die, they die. That's part of what they get at. Whatever. Okay, sure. That's a valid point, I guess. I would suggest that the question of do animals have souls, what you're really asking is do pets have souls? So, you know, there's if you say that Johnny's Fido, you'll see him again, because, you know, doesn't mean that every dog that ever lived will somehow be raised up. Every mosquito that you swat is somehow going to come to life, you know, that sort of stuff. So, but okay, sure, that's another discussion. That's another use of the word soul. Nephesh is here used to mean that something that's animate. So a man is a nephesh and a woman is a nephesh because they move around, and the animals are nepheshes, nepheshim, because they move around too. That's what it's trying to get at. So the world is full of animated things. Flowers don't move around on their own. The wind blows them and they move. The wind doesn't blow. They just kind of sit there and do their flowery thing. Then, the crown of creation comes with verse 26. And God said, let us make Adam in our tselem, man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heaven, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And God created Adam in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. So I've got to stop for a little bit. God said, let us make man in our image. So who's the us? I would suggest that if you put it back in its original cultural context, everybody would understand that God is talking to his heavenly council. In those days, it was understood that when all the gods got together, and there were probably only a couple of dozen gods, you know, you got Marduk, and you got this guy, and you got that guy, and when they were trying to figure out, so should we have a war, famine, pestilence, what do you think? All the gods would go into a council, and they would dope stuff out, and they'd say, yes, we're going to have a war, that city's going to be destroyed, sucks to be them, but that's our decision. So gods were a part of this heavenly pantheon of gods in council. So, because Yahweh is the only God that exists, there aren't any other gods. Yahweh's not going to hang out with Marduk and say, hey, it's my turn to do it. No. Only Yahweh exists. So Yahweh's counsel is that of the angels, the B'nai Elohim, the so-called sons of gods. The understanding that you could have a God without a council, it's like saying you could have a God, you could have a king without a throne. King has a throne. A king has an army. That's why you talk about Yahweh Sebaoth, Yahweh of armies. A Saba is an army, Sebaoth is armies. Because a king has got some armies. He's going to be a king. He's got a throne, he's got a palace. He's got a council. And so this was a part of the habitual, almost emotional, conceptual apparatus. When you thought of a God, he's part of a council. So that's when God says, let us make man, he's saying to the angels, essentially, I'm going to do it. But that's why it's significant that God did not say, let us make seas, let us make daylight, let us make it. No, because this is the importance of what he's about to do. He says, watch this, essentially. So that I suggest, if you wanted to, if you're looking for a proof text, you could say, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, it's the Trinity. Okay, well, I would suggest that there's if you must trample on ancient exegesis, and you could make a connection with enough time and imagination to say the concept of God's magnificence, which makes him unthinkable without a heavenly counsel. That sort of grandiloquence, that magnificence, that fullness of life, ultimately means that God is not a solitary individual, but God is three in one. God is the Trinity. You can make I would suggest you can make the connection. But that would be a separate connection. If you're just doing exegesis and not theology, if you're going to ask the question, is there a Trinitarian significance? Sure. But if you're just doing exegesis, everybody in those days would have understood. They would have scratched their head and said, is God a Trinity? No, they would have understood the heavenly counsel. So that's going. So you'll note that the name for a man is the name Adam. We tend to think of Adam as a name, Adam and Eve. That's especially like that if you translate it into English. So you translate it into a verbal tag, like Steve's not a name. Steve's just means Steve, Adam, I suppose, just means Adam, whatever. But Adam is an actual word. There's the word Ish, which means man. There's the word Enosh, which means kind of a weak man. There's a number of different Hebrew words for man. Adam is one of them. So, and it'll be important because the author, which we'll find out maybe next week. I was hoping to do all 3 chapters, but that ain't gonna happen. Plays with the name of the first created being, Adam, is Adam. And it's interesting. His name is the wife's name is Chava, which means when you translate Chava, what's the English for that? Well, it sounds like Eve. Okay, so it's Eve. No, but it's a word for life. So the name of the first 2 couple is mankind and life. Your first clue, maybe, that you're not reading science. And so when the Greek translators translated the Hebrew into Greek, they changed the name. Her name, Adam named his wife Zoe, which means life. So the Greek says her name was Zoe, for she was the mother of all the zontone. She was Zoe because she's the mother of all the living. How you translate it in English, I suppose you could translate it, I called her Livia because she's the mother of all the living, but I mean, whatever. But I mean, it doesn't work in English. But the point is, when you're reading it in the original, the names of the 2 couples was mankind and life. So, because she was the mother of all the living. Anyway, so that's what's there. And he was in God's likeness, and he was told to rule over everything else. So what does it mean to be in God's likeness, or to be in God's image? Tselem is the Hebrew. A tselem was an image. Like if you made an image or a statue of Marduk, it would look like Marduk, and it was understood that this is how Marduk is present in the world. There was a little ritual that they would do called the opening of the mouth, and you would save stuff to make it, so that Marduk could actually use this statue, this image. But it was understood that this doesn't represent Marduk someplace else. It was understood in paganism that Marduk was present through his tselem, through his image. So what it's saying is not that Adam and Eve are made in the image of God. God has 2 eyes, got a nose, ears. No, it's saying that he is God's representative on earth.
Right.
Yahweh rules the world through Adam. That's why when you know that, it said, let us make let's make Adam in our tselem, in our later likeness, and let them rule over everything. Being in God's image is God's representative, God's co-regent. God rules through him. That's why the first thing that he said was, let them rule over the fish in the sea, over the birds of the sky, and the cattle of the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created Adam in his own image, and the image of God he created them, male and female. He created them. So Adam means mankind, or the plural, them. And you'll note that they come in male and female. You kind of got to say this today. How many genders are there? 2. Count them. Male, female. There you go. And the point, why 2? Because gender has to do here with sexuality and reproduction. If you're only going to have 2 individuals, that's not going to, thank you very much, 2 cannot rule the whole world. But a bunch of them can. So they need to procreate They need to multiply. They need to fill the earth if they're going to subdue it and rule. In short, believe it or not, you need sex in order to fulfill the image of God, according to this thing. Now, that doesn't mean you say, well, I'm a single person, I'm a celibate, am I not the image of God? That's not what it said. Don't read into it. But what it's trying to say is that to rule in God's image means that you have to multiply and subdue the earth, and you need sex for that. So you can later on we can talk about theology and what's the joys of virginity and the power of celibacy, and all that good stuff. Yeah. But that's later, you know. So that it means that when you're talking about male and female, you are talking about sexuality. You're not saying, I feel like a man, I feel like a woman, I identify as this. It's talking about something that's strictly biological. That's the foundation on which everything else is built. So that's why in verse 28, God blessed them. And again, we talked about blessing as kind of a fertility, vigor, fecundity, and God said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule, Wada, over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heaven, over everything that moves upon the earth. So if you're going, in order to rule, you have to multiply and subdue, and that's why that's the point of the blessing. God blesses them with fertility, so they can fulfill what it means to be male and female together. Again, this is the creation story. It doesn't mean that there's no place for singleness. That's not what it's saying. But it's saying that in terms of mankind's destiny to survive in the world depends upon sexuality. That's the only point that it wants to make. That's why you can't say sex is bad. Sex is God's idea. That's probably why he inspired the Song of Solomon to be in the biblical canon. So, verse 29. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed, it shall be food for you. And to every beast of the earth, and every bird of the heaven, and to everything that moves on the earth, which has life, I have given the green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. There was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. So when it says it was very good, once again, the word is tov, and that means that everything was able to function the way that God wanted it to function. If something is not tov, it doesn't mean that it's ethically bad. It means that it's not functioning. A vacuum cleaner that doesn't suck up stuff is not tov. Vacuum cleaners are made to suck up stuff. If it had to do that, it's very nice, it's very pretty, but it's not tov. A knife that can't cut. It's very pretty. You can use it to God knows what, clean your fingernails with or something. But it's not tov because knives are made to cut, and a dull knife is not tov because it can't cut. So when it says that the whole world was very tov, it means everything was functioning exactly as it was supposed to do. The day was functioning to give light so that people could work. The flowers and the plants were functioning to give food to man. Everything was going exactly as it was supposed to. So the story continues on for the next 3 verses, actually, in chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their sabah, all their hosts, all their armies. By the 7th day, God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because he had rested from all his work which he had done, which he created and made. So you got to figure out, again, you have to say, first of all, never mind the Seventh-day Adventist. It doesn't say that God said, man, you have to rest. You say, occasionally you can find happy Seventh-day Adventists saying the Sabbath was a part of God's created order from the very beginning. No, it wasn't. Adam did not keep the Sabbath. God kept the Sabbath, but they didn't say that man kept the Sabbath. And what does it mean to rest? So, if you know the Enuma Elish, if you know ancient creation stories of the ancient Near East, it was understood that the gods did their work of creation, and then they enter into their temples and rest, and from their temples rule the universe. It's kind of like resting doesn't mean that I'm digging a ditch and I finish digging the ditch. Oh, I'm all done. Drop your shovel and then have a snooze. No, there was the idea of resting. The gods rested from their work and entered into their temples to run the universe. And so what it's trying to say is that the universe is the temple of God. God didn't, there was no temple. The world was his temple. That's what it's trying to say. The world is a holy place because it's the temple of God. That when it said God rested, he meant he entered into his temple to run the universe. That's how everybody would have understood that. That's what's going on. And so obviously later on in the Exodus, they would say you rest on the seventh day, and it says God rested on the seventh day. You would kind of go back to this, but this is not the creation of the Sabbath. This is God entering into his temple of the world, the cosmic temple, if you wanted to put it like that. I'm sure they won't be able to do chapter 2. It's apparent, but just to say now that when we do get to chapter 2, we'll find that it's another creation story. First of all, the name of God is different. God is called here Elohim, one of the two names for God. In chapter 2, he's called Yahweh. Once in a while, they're combined, Yahweh Elohim. Mm-hmm. But here it's a different name, and it tells a different story. For example, in this story, man is the crown of creation. Mm-hmm. So God makes everything. He makes the flowers. He makes the fish and the birdies, and he makes the beasts, and then as the crown, Adam, man and woman, male and female. In the second story, he makes the Adam, and then he makes the beasts, and then he makes the Ishah, the woman. It's a different order. Mm-hmm. And so you say, well, that's a contradiction. No, it's not a contradiction. It's a different story. It's trying to tell something different. In the first creation story, you get the cosmic look. The word Elohim is the normal word for God. It's a word that you might describe the God of the cosmos, the God of everything. Yahweh is the name by which God revealed himself to Moses. When God appeared at the burning bush, and he said, liberate Israel from Egypt, and Moses essentially thought, who, me? I think you got the wrong guy. And he said, if the children of Israel ask, what is his name? What shall I say? And the name, again, was not a verbal tag. As I mentioned, the name is a code for the manifestation of God's power. So in wanting to know God's name, they weren't saying, his name is George. No. What they're asking for is he strong enough to do this? Are you sure that this God is strong enough to smite Pharaoh, the superpower of the world, and get us out of Egypt? What's his name? And so God said, tell them, I am who I am. Say, I am has sent me to you. And the word I am, that's the Hebrew word Hayah, which is cognate with the word Yahweh. So Yahweh is the I am. That's what we say at the end of our service. Blessed is Christ our God, the I am. Mm-hmm. When it got translated into Greek, it was Ha'on, the being. There's no icon that we can see easily here, but Ha, it looks like an O, and then it looks like a W. It's the Omega, and then it looks like a V. It's actually an N. It's a new Ha'on, the being. That's how it translates the I am. It says, tell him Ha'on has sent me to you, the being. I mean, it's a translate Hebrew going into Greek. So when you see that little Ha'on, the I am, when it's saying that icon is proclaiming that Jesus of Nazareth is the one who revealed himself to Moses at the burning bush.
Is it like this? Like this one?
Yes, from what I can see. That's it. It won't show up on there very much, but that's okay. So Yahweh is the, if I may say, the revelatory name of God, the name by which God revealed himself to Israel. It's one would almost say it's a more personal name than the cosmic general Elohim, because the word Elohim just means God. It's the plural. It actually means gods. So you have the cosmic Elohim creating the world, and then the God who would reveal himself to Israel, Yahweh, in here. So it's a different story, and it wants to make a different point. It wants to, what's tempted to say, if Genesis 1 is talking about the creation of the cosmos, Genesis 2 is talking about the human condition, and it wants to make some points about marriage, man and woman, because it is through man and woman that civilization will be created. So, for example, a sneak preview. The word for man is the word ish. the ah is the feminine ending in the Hebrew. You don't have feminine endings in English. It's whatever. But ah is the feminine ending. So to call the woman Ishah, which is the normal word for woman, it's the word ish with a feminine ending. You could say woman, it doesn't work. But that's what's going on. So when it says it is not tov for man to be alone, it doesn't mean because man's lonely. I'm so lonely, I don't have a woman. That ain't the point. He cannot fulfill his function by himself. It is not tov for him to be alone. For it to be tov, he needs the partner. So significantly, again, this is a sneak peek. He has no part in the creation of the woman. That's why God sends a deep sleep on him.
Yeah.
So, because he named all of the animals, but for this he has no part. He's a deep sleep, and God essentially cuts him in half. Usually it says he took a rib. What the Hebrew actually says is he took a side.
Yeah.
Like a side of beef?
Mm-hmm.
That. It's the same word for side is the word used for side of the hill, for side of the ark. You took one half a man, and they usually translate a rib, because if you take a whole side off of a guy, he's going to be dead. He's not going to. You can have a rib, and I can survive.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take one half of my body, I can't survive. But that's what it actually says.
Mm-hmm.
So the Ishah is an aspect of the man, as it were. So he's asleep. He has nothing to say about it, and from her, God literally builds a woman, because the word build, I think it's the word bana, I'll have to say, it means something strong. She's not a tiny little weak little woman. No, this is, God built something strong. And then when the Adam sees her, there's this cry, there's this recognition, this is it. This is exactly what I've been looking for. This cry of ecstasy, in which he said, "This is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called Ishah, for she was taken out of Ish." When you translate it, she should be called woman because she's taken out of man. You lose the play on words. But so it's talking about how they complement each other, how they need each other. If Adam corporately is going to be tov, you need to have both. And there's also hierarchy in there as well. Just to let the feminists know, if you weren't, I should infuriate everybody in this one talk. That to name is a function of creation, as we have seen. God says, "Let there be light," and God gives it the name day, or it creates this rakia and calls it heaven. Gathered together, it's called earth. It's called seas, and so. Naming is a function of creation, and when God is trying to find a partner, something that's tov for man, God creates the animals to see what the Adam will name them. And it said whatever the Adam named him, that was its name. So man, the Adam, has a share in God's creation because he names it. Significantly, he names her. She shall be called Ishah, and later on he gives them the name Chava, life, because she's the mother of all the living. So there's hierarchy, but there's a radical hierarchy, and there's an equally radical egalitarianism in there as well. And so when you got to put it back in its context in order to see, and so this is it. Just then I'll ask a question and possibly end. The understanding that man could, like a male, could be in the selim of God, the image of the God. It was anciently understood, look, the king is the image of the God. God rules the world through the king. That's why he's the king. You're not the king, you're ballast, essentially, And woman, worse than that, So this is saying, as a matter of fact, your humblest peasant in the field is not ballast. Humblest peasant working in the fields, poor, ignorant, illiterate, is still the selim of Elohim. He is still in the image of God. And more remarkably, the woman is the image of God as well. Man and woman jointly are the image of God, ruling the world in the name of Elohim. So this is revolutionary. And we still have not figured this out. So as long as we are saying that people are expendable, which we are, as long as we're saying that women are chattel and objects, that's the multi-gazillion dollar pornography industry, what does that mean? It means that women are chattel still, as a matter of fact. It can be bought and sold. So that we haven't learned from Genesis that the man and the woman together are in the image of God. They are God. That is the dignity that everyone has. Before, only kings had it, and even then, it only went back to by armies. But by the mere fact of creation, soon as you emerge from the womb, helpless, poor, broke, whatever's going to happen to you, you are still in the image of Elohim. So this is utterly revolutionary in the ancient world, and as I say, we have not clued into it even yet. I would suggest. Any questions before the clock stops ticking?
I have a bit of a question. It's about revelation, and also I'm having a hard time putting it into words because it comes around to ancient experience. Like you said, like it's written from an anthropocentric point of view.
Yeah.
It's like humans' experience of all these things.
Yeah.
You know, of the time that we had these pagan creation stories of what they knew. We have like, you know, our experience of, you know, sun rising and all this kind of stuff. And you were kind of clarifying that the revelation is God's revelation of himself, like theological, not necessarily like, oh, there's atoms and this is how. Yeah. I'm trying to I've come across this a lot in my experience chatting with secular community.
Yeah.
Come across this phrase of, it's a little bit, it's quite heretical to say it this way, is God didn't create man in his image. Man created God in his image. In this kind of sense of like, you kind of know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do.
And so this, I guess I'm just wondering this, and maybe coming from, it feels like in the Orthodox world there's a bit more of a nuanced understanding of the synergy of human beings writing this of the time and then God's revelation. So like things like God explained as a father. Like is this, sorry, this is me just trying to like wrap my head around this. God explaining himself as a father, is that's not necessarily us trying to like make God in his image. It's God condescending to our level so that we understand him.
My guess is that the phrase which I've heard till it bores me to tears, that man makes God in his image. I thought, it generally presupposes that that there is no God, and that the scriptures of the Old Testament and the teaching of Jesus Christ is just, the scriptures are just so much ancient literature, which is no more valuable than anything else. That the Bible is no better than the Enuma Elish, and Jesus is whatever, some Jew guy, their stuff. Who cares? So, but. Okay, whatever. So, of course, if you don't believe that there's a God, and if man says, "Well, I think there is a God," of course he's going to make him in his own image. What's going to make him in the image of a horse, the great horse in the sky? But if there is a God, the question is, has he revealed himself or not? If Jesus is not just some Jew guy, if he's the Son of the living God who died for our sins, cleansed the universe of sin, and rose from the dead, that if he's saying that God is a father and God loves us, then that's probably true. Who argues with a guy that rises from the dead? So I thought this is if you presuppose that there's no God, I guess the statement that man makes God in his own image, sure, I guess. If there's no God, I guess that's our guess, and it's a stupid guess. But I don't accept their major premise. I think that there is a God. And so if someone says, "Why do you believe that there's a God?" I thought, well, let's talk about the empty tomb. Let's talk about what's the deal with a Jew in Second Temple Judaism claiming to be Almighty God himself, and then rising from the dead 3 days later. What you make of that? Then we can talk. So, but that it's, for me, it almost begins and ends with Jesus. And so if there is such a thing as revelation, then of course God's going to say, talk to us in terms that we can understand, because what else can he do? You know, some of the he'll use metaphors that we can understand, like a king. So it's what it says is God is our king before the ages. Doesn't mean that he has a crown or an army and or whatever. But all that we mean by a king, someone that is beneficent, hopefully, someone that is powerful, someone that is able to take care of us, someone that is able to defend us, that is able to fight our battles and keep us safe. That's what a king was. We say that's what God is. And I suppose if you wanted to speak purely analytical Hellenistic language, you could just not use any metaphor and just try to say the ground of all being is very loving and beneficent and stuff like this. But nobody talks like that. You don't talk like that to children because it's so stupid and boring. It could bore the smile off the face of the Mona Lisa. You know, of course you're going to say something that inspires and cheers the heart. God is our king before the ages. He has worked salvation in the midst of the earth. Because especially if you're a Christian and you might have to die for your faith. You say, well, I don't know about dying for the ground of all being, but I will die for my king who loves me. You know, I mean, so it's not a philosophy that you do in some ivory tower. It's a life that you live out on the battlefield, where you get knocked down a lot, and where you might be martyred. You know, and so that's why I imagine when God revealed himself, he didn't reveal himself as the ground of all being, like you know, he revealed himself as a father. He revealed himself as our king. You know, and so
it to me, it almost, the way you explain that, it reminds me of just us going through Philippians of Christ kind of condescending into our reality.
Yeah.
And the image that keeps coming back to my mind is, especially when I talk to other people that don't have anything to do with this, no understanding about the story, is like it's a father it's like a father getting down on knees, looking eye level.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, exactly. So you're going to talk to a kid about and use like crazy science textbook terms, and they're like, "What? Like you're not going to grasp it."
Because it's not about if you're a philosopher, which is to say, you have far too much time on your hands, and that sort of stuff. But if you're going to be, okay, sure. But I mean, in real life, where we're talking to people who aren't philosophers, who don't care about philosophy. They're confused. They're scared. They're afraid of a gazillion things. They're afraid of getting sick. They're afraid of their children getting kidnapped. They're afraid of dying. They're afraid of God knows what, marriages collapsing or something like this. They're afraid of all of these sort of things, and they're afraid of the doctor. What's that lump? You know, that's that sort of stuff. They go out into the world. They speak the truth, and people don't like them. They get canceled. They get beaten up. That sort of stuff. So, if these are the people that populate the world, and so the question, you got to give them something to help them survive, that they can live. So if you're going to reveal yourself, it has to be in terms that can actually help us. Because I mean, the number of people that will find that sort of inspiration for life in dry philosophical terms, I suspect you could fit into my car.
It has to be told. It kind of comes back to that, right? It has to have a purpose.
Yeah.
God's revelation.
Yeah, and so as you say, God has to condescend, because you might not know what the ground of all being was, and you're not quite sure what does that mean. But everybody knows what a father is. Everybody, who's not an American possibly, knows what a king is. That sort of stuff. And so, you know, well, anciently, now we don't know what a king is, because we don't have kings. I mean, we have fairly attenuate. God bless King Charles, you know. But at any rate, that's not the ancient king. The ancient king went out at the head of the army to fight your battles, to save your wife and children. So that's what it means when it said God is our king before the ages. So like I said, we need to be comforted and inspired, and philosophy, you know, the consolation of philosophy and stuff like that doesn't doesn't do that for, I suspect, most people.
I guess I have too much time on my hands.
Too much time on your hands? Okay. Well, don't worry, your teacher's got homework coming for you tomorrow. That'll take care of all of that.
Father, a quick question about we were talking about having dominion over
Yeah.
everything.
Ah.
I'm thinking about everything having a purpose.
Yes.
So in this context, is talking about dominion, because he's wanting them to, obviously with male and female, he's wanting all the species to flourish.
Right.
Is that, and for us to have dominion over them, is it talking about responsibility and accountability, or is it talking about just merely for our own decision as Adam as Adam to be deciding what's going to happen to all these things on the earth?
Yeah. I think it's that's a very good question. And so when it talks about fill the earth and subdue it and rule over the fish, one can now that we've experienced deforestation and man making a mess of stuff, the temptation is to say, okay, this all comes back to those horrible Christians and maybe the horrible Jews. Anyway, Genesis. That it's our responsibility for saying we're exploiting the earth,
Right.
and that sort of stuff. And so the ancients didn't exploit the earth. I mean, we do this because we have bombs now. Ain't that wonderful? But again, when you leave anachronism to one side and go back into there, it was a strong word, radah, to rule the earth, but it's understood that you have to push back nature, or nature will kill you. For example, if you're going to live, you have to push back the forest, or there'll be no place to farm. So it's the first thing people that came into Toronto, Scarborough, my place where I came from, in southern Ontario, not the real Scarborough in England, Scarborough Fair, is that they had to cut down all of the trees. They had a homestead that they were legally given,
Right, yeah.
but they spent all the time cutting down the trees and pulling out the roots so that they could have a place to farm. That was radah. That was ruling it. It wasn't exploiting the land, the rape of the earth or something like that. It's if you don't do that, within a few years, nature will take over,
Right.
and it'll all be forest again, and there'll be no place to farm, and you'll be dead. So, like I said, nature is always going to impinge, and so if you don't stop pushing against nature, nature will push back against you, and it'll win because it's bigger. And so that's kind of what's going on. So you could have places that have been deserted, like all the people moved out, and the trees take over everything.
That's right.
So that's what nature does. So it's not talking about the rape of the earth or something like this. It's talking about having the strength to subdue it so that you can cut down the trees, not all of them, just enough to make your garden.
Right.
But man is still meant to be the steward of the earth, to rule over the earth. Doesn't mean that you rape it or exploit it or take all of the resources out of it. Why? Because you're going to need it. You're not stupid. They know how to let the land lie fallow so that you can get the most out of the thing. They weren't. So, now we have technology and we can rape the earth. Isn't that wonderful? But anciently they didn't.
Right.
So it is an anachronistic mistake to read that sort of thing into the Judeo-Christian accounts of the thing. Thank you for mentioning that.
One short question.
Yeah.
How about time?
Time?
Yeah.
Funny you should mention that, as we're just coming to the end of our session there. But what about time?
Is it mentioned in Genesis or something like that?
No, later theologians would say that God created time at the same time as he created space. That they are, in fact, space and time are coterminous. But admittedly, I suppose you could say there was evening and there was morning one day, but that's not so much. Okay, God creates time. Later on, God would create seed time and harvest, as it'll say after the flood. In other words, time for the ancients meant time for planting, time for reaping. To everything there is a season, you know, and stuff like that. You're an agricultural community. Time meant time to sow, time to reap, time to plant, time to wait for the thing to grow, and try not to starve in the winter, things like that. So that was kind of the time then.
It is implied at the beginning, though, right, with the first passage of day and night, that time
Yeah,
was
yeah,
moving along.
that's right. And the evening and morning. And it's interesting that in Judaism, forgive me, I'm keeping you. In Judaism, for example, the Sabbath begins in the evening.
Yeah.
And so that's why liturgically our day begins in the evening. First service of the day is Vespers. And then Matins. Because it's a Jewish thing. So that's why when you come to Saturday Vespers, the theme is the resurrection, because liturgically it's Sunday. When you come to Sunday night, liturgically the theme is the angels, because liturgically it's Monday. So it talks about evening and morning one day. It means that just as a person had a work week, this was God's work week. In our work week, I get to plow possibly, I don't know, half an acre, maybe, something. God creates the cosmos. So it's talking, and it's so, as you can see, it is also a mistake to say, was the day 24 hours? You're missing the whole point. The point was that the word for day is yom. And it generally means a day. 24 hours, you go to bed, you get up, and that's a yom. But if you're thinking that it's teaching a science, I guess the world was created in 6 24-hour yoms, but it's not what it's talking about. It's talking about the power of God. It's not giving you a blow by blow. So occasionally, Concordance will say, well, a yom could be an age. This could be a way of talking about evolution and things. Okay, put it to one side. Listen to what the text is saying. There's no sense somehow, after you've acknowledged that the text says that before the creation of the world, everything was sea, and there was land in the sea. After you've said that there was daylight before God created the sun and the moon, after you've admitted that the sky is solid to keep the sea out there, after you've acknowledged that somehow God creates the plants and with seeds in them before creating the sun and the moon, once you've admitted all of that, it's a little late to be arguing about how long is a yom. Is it 24 hours or not? You've left science way behind, baby doll. So that's okay. So try to read the text like a poet, because it was written by poetry. All the best stuff comes into us in poetry. That's why there's so much hymns in our Orthodox worship. And so anyway, bless you. Thank you very much.